All right, we'll go ahead and get started. First off, I just want to welcome everyone to this in our webinar series for the Southern Plains Transportation Center. My name is Michael Molina. I'm the librarian for the Oklahoma Transportation Library. And so on behalf of the library and SPTC, as well as the Oklahoma Department of Transportation and ABC UTC, we'd like to welcome everyone and thanks everybody for participating, for joining this webinar. If everyone doesn't mind, I will be recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on SPTC's website later, probably later today or later in the week as well. So if there aren't any objections, we'll have this recorded and posted for people to view it. If you're needing PDHs for this webinar, we will be keeping track of that based on your login and log out times. So just make sure if you want PDHs to make sure and log in for the entire period as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Larry, who will introduce today's speaker, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate you all being on here this afternoon. This has been a great relationship that we have with Oklahoma Asphalt Pavement Association has with the SPTC. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of that. Just some real quick items before we get going. One thing I'll ask for everybody to please mute their mics so we can have a good clear channel and hear Elizabeth when she gets ready to speak. Also, I would ask that if you have any questions, just put it in the chat box and then we'll try to answer them at the end and get through all of them that you may have. So just put it in the chat box for us. Appreciate, like I said, everybody being here. As we hear more about the transportation funding, transportation bills, and so on that are out there, the transportation stimulus package there, a lot more is being emphasized about sustainability, resiliency. You know, last month we had Dr. Ben Bowers with Auburn University that he was on here and talking about resiliency, especially kind of toward the asphalt side of things. And we're very lucky today to have Elizabeth Habic with FHWA. She's an environmental specialist, protection specialist with FHWA. And she's been doing this for a long time, and appreciate her doing this and being able to be on board and talk about this. I wish we would have had them both together, but Dr. Bowers as well as Elizabeth, but we're lucky that we have Elizabeth with us today. So with that, Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Larry. And thanks, Bashara, for helping get this all set up. I really appreciate being asked to come here today, and I'm glad you all, hopefully most of you heard from Ben Bowers last time, and he's laid some of the groundwork for me in getting into this topic. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen with you all, and thanks for having me today. Is that showing up? Does that look right?
No.
Nope, nothing's showing up.
Nothing. Okay.
We have to share your screen.
Yeah, I did it right the first time, but not this time, I guess. Let me try again. So, so yeah, and I appreciate Larry, you mentioning all of the emphasis right now on resilience because there is just so much going on in this area. Let's see. Oh, I know what I did.
There we go. Perfect.
Got it? Okay. So, so yeah, really this year, we've been working on resilience for a long time, but there has been a new emphasis on climate change initiatives this year, and I think a lot more will be coming down the road on resilience. And just so you all know, let me just fill you in a little on my background. I came to Federal Highway in 2019 to work on climate resilience and some infrastructure kinds of work for Federal Highway. But before that, I worked for the state of Maryland for a long time. So a lot of my experience has been in the coastal areas as well as, some of our inland. areas with flooding and working on climate resilience for a long time. I worked for Maryland State Highway for 12 years, working on NEPA projects and working on climate resilience. As things have changed over the years in this area, it's been kind of an interesting change from focusing on greenhouse gas reduction to looking more at the physical impacts and looking at the flooding that's happening and how we can address these kinds of issues in the coastal areas with flooding and with some of the inland areas where we've seen an increase in floodplain type flooding. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of my background there, but I also worked for the Port of Maryland for about 5 years working on dredge projects. So some of my experience kind of, gets all mixed together there. But anyway, so today I'm going to go over some of the federal highway approaches to resilience, some of our tools, pilot studies that we've done, work we've done with other states and MPOs, and some federal agencies, some of the studies that we've done that have been more pavement focused, and then some ongoing work and some things that are going to be coming out from federal highway soon. So I think Ben would have gone over this, the definition of resilience. Federal highways defined it under Order 5520 as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. It's kind of a broad definition. My group focuses on the natural impacts that we see that's exacerbated by climate change. So looking at things where we were seeing the drier weather and the drier settings in the West, where we've had a lot of fires, and then some of these super storms we've seen where we've had some larger hurricanes or more frequent storms, even some of these winter tornadoes, whatever kinds of things might be happening that are out of the ordinary. So, for us addressing resilience, there's, a lot of good reasons, but most transportation agencies focus on safety, reliability, mobility. These are all things that resilience helps ensure. Looking at the expenses for the life cycle of your assets and planning resilience into the life cycle can help save funds. And then US DOT has it in their strategic plan to ensure that infrastructure is resilient and promote durability and resilience to improve safety and performance. So that's why we work on this. There's a lot of disruptions when we get these extreme events, and especially these, we see hurricanes, but we also see a lot of riverine flooding throughout the Midwest. We work with Iowa quite a bit, and some other states have been pretty active with federal highway on some of these flood issues. And of course, it also accelerates deterioration of the pavement when it's wet all the time like this. And, just one of the things I like to point out, because most of our pictures are interstates, a lot of federal highway work is done directly with the states. But I like to point out that, the local network in a lot of areas makes up such a huge part of the transportation network. And these local roads are really the ones I've seen the worst impacts on with sea level rise. There are permanent signs in on the eastern shore of Maryland, like this one that says flood area. This floods every day, and everyone that lives there knows that this road will flood at high tide. And there's some signs that just have the like the hinge on it that flip up. So at high tide, someone from maintenance goes out and flips the sign up and says, wet road or flood area or whatever it is. And you can use Google Earth to find these locations and see where the pavement's dark. Sometimes I just wanted to make sure that, when we we look at this, we don't just focus on the DOTs, because so much of this is local network, and they build their roads a little differently. So it's important to remember. So integrating resilience into projects, project development has been a priority for us. We've done a lot of pilot studies in this kind of in this area, really from the very earliest stages of planning a project, looking at long-range transportation plans. This example here on the left is showing you Washington State's assessment of their vulnerability of their roadway network. This kind of early planning can really help make sure that you don't get to project design and somebody says that this area is going to be inundated with increased, we've seen an increase in flooding in this area, or you can tell that there's going to be an issue with sea level rise, or whatever it is in this area. By the time you're in project design, you've already got your scope and your schedule and your funds, and adding in extra drainage is not going to happen at that point. So it's really critical to have this in the earliest stages, to have some idea of what kind of climate impacts you may have in the area of your project. And then when you do get into developing the project, your environmental review should document that information. The permitting agencies may have their own climate guidance. So the Corps of Engineers or Fish and Wildlife Service, not necessarily all permitting agencies, but if you need environmental reviews from all of your partner federal agencies on a project, they may have their own climate initiatives. I know Fish and Wildlife has certain restrictions on where they can buy mitigation property, or that sort of thing. So it's really important to consider that during your project development process and design. And then even at the end, when you get to operations and maintenance, clearing out your culverts to prevent certain areas from flooding. You may have more debris accumulating in certain areas than it used to, or different things that you'd have to consider for emergency response. Just knowing where things might flood and having those routes designated to get around that flooding, especially if you're relying on buses to help evacuate people, and having those plans in place. So considering resilience early and throughout the entire process is really important. So some of the variables that I've been talking about include drought conditions, moisture, temperature, precipitation. These are the kinds of things that we see having the most impact on pavements. And I won't go into much detail on this, but if any of you have seen the fourth National Climate Assessment, there's some detailed information there on changes in temperature based on the what they call the regional climate projections. So depending on the amount of carbon emissions that that go on over time, there's different scenarios for how much hotter or cooler it might become in different parts of the country. So so this kind of gives you an idea. RCP 4.5 is sort of a middle scenario, and RCP on the right, 8.5, is a high emission scenario. 8.5 is the trajectory that we were on. So if we don't really change anything in the emissions, that's the pathway that looks most probable. But some just like to use 4.5 for planning because it's in the middle, and they like to just go with a middle ground. So you can use either emission scenario for how you want to plan, and they give you a little bit of information on the different options there. And the same for precipitation. This is showing you the difference between the scenario for 4.5 and 8.5 on the right, just showing the increases in precipitation that we might expect to see under either scenario. So what Federal Highway has done is completed a tool that can be used to do regional downscaling for precipitation. A lot of this is used for by hydraulic engineers, but as you know, for pavement work, this is really important to know how much moisture you might be expecting to get in certain areas, and what water levels you might be dealing with in floodplains and coastal areas. So this tool was just updated this year, and there are going to be some webinars coming soon on how to use this tool. So if you're interested in that, my website link, you can use that to sign up for email blasts that let you know when things are going on in our office. Or you can just contact me if you're interested in this. So vulnerability assessments, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit, just so you know what a vulnerability assessment is. Vulnerability really looks at the amount of stress to an asset under current and projected conditions, not necessarily how much damage it will have or how much more critical it is than something else. But vulnerability is really just about what stress is happening to that asset. It's really, it's pretty basic, and it's you know, if you're going to have 2 feet of water on this roadway or 6 inches of water on that roadway, and it doesn't necessarily compare the two and say which one you need to address first, or give you any of that information. It's more just a straightforward assessment. Vulnerability assessments look at future changes and kind of give you an idea of what, you know, where your impacts are, so that you can plan appropriately and do further studies in certain locations if that's what you decide to do. They can be system level. You could have something that's just for a city, or you can do something that is very detailed for a project. And we have an ADAP process that I'll show you in a little bit. It's an 11-step process just to kind of think through the project development process and what kind of things you could include to include adaptation for different vulnerabilities. And then I did want to just mention, I think this is the only time we talk about risk, but vulnerability and risk are two very different things. Vulnerability really looks at how sensitive an asset is. So if it's an older asset, if it, what kind of condition it's in, those sorts of things. It looks at the adaptive capacity. So is there a detour route? Is there redundancy in the network? Adaptive capacity includes the amount of traffic volume on that roadway. We use ADT a lot to capture that information. And then there's exposure. So what kind of elements could this asset be exposed to? Could it be, you know, a particular storm event? You know, maybe not the 10-year storm event, but the 50-year storm event would flood this road. That kind of information could be used for exposure. So that's really, you know, those components make up vulnerability, where risk is often uses vulnerability information, but it really looks at the probability or likelihood of something occurring and the consequence. So, so you're really looking at, how likely is it for this bridge that's 40 feet high to be flooded? It's probably not that great. It's not very likely, but the consequence of this bridge that is, the only way across this waterway for another 100 miles might be extremely important. So, so those are the kinds of things that you would think about with risk. And a lot of times, like I said, vulnerability plays a part where you use that kind of information in your risk assessment. So Federal Highway developed a vulnerability assessment and adaptation framework. This is a great document that can be accessed on our website. This was put together with lots of different pilot studies done by the states, and it's in its 3rd edition right now. We talk about updating it again, so maybe that'll happen soon, but right now we have the 3rd edition online if anybody wants to take a look at that. And these are the pilot studies that have been completed to date. So some of these states or MPOs have had multiple pilots. That's where you'll see the colors kind of blending. So say Oregon DOT has participated in both the nature-based resilience pilot study and the vulnerability and adaptation studies. So these started in 2010, which is sort of basic vulnerability assessments, and have included now nature-based solutions and an asset management study on incorporating climate resilience. And then the last group of pilots were on extreme weather and durability. And those just finished up. If anybody saw the presentation at TRB in January, all 11 of those pilot studies from 2018 to 2020 presented during that session. And we're putting together a report now that will summarize the findings of those studies. So I'm going to jump around a little with different resources. This synthesis, sorry, I can't say that word very well, was put together in 2017. It has a section on pavement and soils. So there's some good information in here on some engineering studies, and this could be a good resource if you're looking for some information on work that's been done to address resilience, and has an economic analysis included in the report. This is the ADAP process. This is the 11-step process. It's very, very basic so that anybody could just take these different options and try to put them into their own process. To some degree, the project development process for DOTs is, it's pretty much the same in a lot of ways, but they all have their own little nuances from one location to another. So if there's, if you're putting together alternatives for a project, maybe depending on how different your alternatives are, if they're in different locations, you may want to consider a location that wouldn't go through a certain area that is going to flood or have worse flooding in the future. Maybe it's not in a floodplain, but maybe this area tends to get wetter than another area, or different. You could look at different options for design or base materials or whatever it is when you're doing some of the alternatives analysis. And then just so that where, because a lot of these studies have focused on planning, getting things into the process early, to find some of the engineering focused studies. These are the ones that, and where they're located, that have focused on the Gulf Coast work that was very engineering detailed studies, though that was an earlier study in the Gulf Coast 2 work. The adaptation pilots that were finished in 2015 have a lot more engineering information. The post-Sandy resilience study that was done in New York, New Jersey, that's a great resource. And then the TECR studies, TECR stands for the Transportation Engineering Approaches to Climate Resilience. So, so I'm going to use that acronym TEACR a few other times. And you can Google search TEACR Federal Highway and find any of those, find that information pretty easily. Some of the pavement strategies, I pulled this out of the Sustainable Pavements program, where it was noted some of the indicators for asphalt pavement and concrete pavement that that you would see for climate change impacts. So these are some of the things we're talking about when we're seeing, more impacts happening in certain locations. So we're talking about raveling and block cracking, and this isn't all my language, so so I'm not going to mispronounce something. I'll let you all read the slide with some of the different impacts here. But a lot of the freeze thaw issues, we've done some work with permafrost in Alaska. And some of the blow-ups have been a big issue. I know sometimes that's just a lot of other issues that come into play with blow-ups, but we've been doing some geotechnical work, and just the relationship between pavement, geotechnical, and hydraulics is so close, and there's so many impacts that you might see in pavement that are related to the other two areas. It's kind of good to work together and look at these issues as a whole. So this goes back to our vulnerability framework. The framework has includes a vulnerability assessment scoring tool. I use this tool to assess the point assets, meaning like bridges or culverts. I think putting the data into this kind of a tool, that's really handy when you're looking at something that you have a lot of data for already, or can easily gather. To try to do sort of a vulnerability assessment, and it'll give you a score. So while I was talking about vulnerability earlier, it may not give you the exact ranking of how important this particular asset is over another. It will tell you how much more vulnerable it is. So so this score could be really helpful. Just in being able to sort of figure out where you should focus some of your effort. When it comes to pavement vulnerability, I've found that just doing sort of a flooding assessment, using centerline data, if you have it, LiDAR is so much better now. There's usually, it's usually at least some sort of elevation data that you can get for your pavement, and just by modeling a flood event pretty easily, and universities in my experience have been great at doing that kind of work if they have the GIS team to do it. So so some of that work is really helpful for figuring out where you have the most vulnerability. The CMIP tool then, like I said, can help with projecting temperature changes and precipitation changes in a local area. It's a regional downscaling tool. So, so to kind of summarize this, looking at future conditions, this is a flow diagram for the ADAP process. And so those 11 steps I showed you on the other slide, you can go through here and look at the different steps and kind of think about this in your own process. It's broken up so that, however your project development process is laid out, you can take these different pieces and just and use what fits most appropriately into what you want to do. So, if you have Yeah, there's, I'm looking at the middle there, after step number 5, where you assess performance of the facility. Um, the yellow triangle says are design standards met. So, so that is very generic, so that depending on your design standards, some states are changing their design standards for different climate issues. And, you know, those that can, you know, help you figure out where some of these steps, where you can fit resilience in to what you're working on. There's also the Sustainable Pavements program. There was an article in here in Public Roads that you can reference for information on resilience measures and pavements. And then the TECR studies, I just wanted to mention, there's 5 studies here that focused on either temperature and precipitation or just temperature. So these are the 5 specific studies looking at pavement shrink swell, freeze thaw, looking at some flood issues, the permafrost, and slope stability. So, so these are the exact locations and type of work that was included in TECR. And so the Texas TECR study looked at more resilient pavement strategies and found that some of these strategies were not a major cost increase. So some of these strategies could be good examples to use for a project in the future. And then Maine looked at freeze thaw issues and truckload restrictions, looked at spring melts and the economic impact on trucking. So if you have any of these kinds of issues that you want to evaluate, these could be some good examples. The pilot studies that I mentioned earlier, there were 6 states that worked on the asset management studies. And as most of you may know, the asset management rule for federal highway requires that that pavements account for climate considerations in their that they account for climate considerations. So, so 6 states worked on the pilots to integrate climate resilience into asset management. So this was a lot of work with pavement engineers and bridge engineers, because pavement and bridges were the 2 required assets in the asset management plans. So the 6 states were Arizona, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Texas. And this is just an example. The Maryland work was looking at incorporating pavement vulnerability into the pavement management system, looking for areas where deterioration might be increased due to flooding, and the percentage of time that roadways would be inundated, whether it was overtopped or within an inch of the top of the pavement. So, so that was some work that that was done to try to further the integration of resilience into asset management. And now we've been working on a pavement resilience guidebook. So the guidebook started off with just a literature review. There's been several peer exchanges. We had peer exchanges last October and December. I don't know if any of you attended those. But now we're developing a draft guidebook that we'll have reviewed. I don't know that we're planning to have another workshop as part of this, but hopefully we'll have the guidebook out. I'm hoping for summer sometime, but I would assume sometime this year. And then just to give you an idea of what we talked about during the peer exchanges, we did some polling questions. And this was, we asked the group, there were a lot of state DOTs at these peer exchanges, academics and industry attended. We asked, what are your top 3 issues that you have the most concerned about in your organization? And the number 1 with almost 80% was inundation due to flooding. The second top concern, 50%, was concerned with erosion, washouts, and scour. 46% was concerned about sea level rise and related issues. And 38% was concerned with temperature impacts on pavement materials and design process. Then we asked, what is the most pressing pavement issue now? 76% said pavement designs that take flooding concerns into account. 48% said that making existing pavement more resilient rather than building something from scratch. And 43% said the pavement ME calibration for climate-related inputs. So, so those were the top concerns that we saw with these peer exchanges. This is just a couple of the poll questions so that we could get an idea of what we should be focusing on. So the guidebook, when it's done, will identify specific approaches that were identified as being effective after talking with our various stakeholders. Step-by-step kind of information, and it's limited to pavements, but it does connect, you know, the pavements obviously connect to other assets. Like I mentioned, hydraulics and geotechnical area concerns often sort of overlap with pavement issues. I wanted to mention the floodcast work that the National Highway Research Program is working on, the NCHRP. This has been in the works since 2014. And this study, and I'm sorry, I guess the bottom kind of got turned around backwards, but if you look up the NCHRP study on the top of the slide and type in floodcast, you can see the information here. This is really a tool that was put together for some of the users of the information. But this is a study where they're trying to take actual weather as it's coming in and use data to kind of give you an idea of where impacts will occur. So if you already know, you know, that a certain storm, say, a 100-year storm event has 3 inches of rain in 2 hours or something, and you know what water levels might occur in a particular watershed under that condition, you could take this storm data and translate it to that condition to help with predicting areas that would be vulnerable to a particular storm. So floodcast is kind of taking that work so that when a storm comes in, you could see the impact of what that storm might leave you with. So that's been in the works for a while, and they've been doing some pilots now on the study with states. This study uses the national water model and uses a lot of the national tools that are put together at the National Water Center in Alabama. So some of the things that we have to help with the hydraulics side, this is the hydraulics engineering circular for riverine environments. This was updated to include some climate impacts back in 2016. I imagine we will continue updating these as needed, and closely related to this is an NCHRP study 1561, where they're trying to include the impacts of climate to to see what kind of design issues there might be for hydraulic design in the riverine environments. And that NCHRP study I just mentioned, they're doing pilot studies now in the States for that work as well. So there is an initial report that's already published. And then Hydraulics Engineer Circular 25, HEC 25, this volume 2 is currently being updated. This, I'd imagine, could be released at any time now. I believe it was in final review. So this will be coming out very, very soon, and does include a lot more information on sea level rise and coastal environment issues for engineers dealing with climate. Federal Highway Resilience Resources, as I've mentioned, a few of these, the adaptation framework, talked just now about HEC 25, HEC 17, the Gulf Coast 2 study. There's the pilot studies. These pilot reports, there's they're broken down into those categories, but there's just the pilot reports that were done ending in 2015. There were 19 pilot studies in there. So if you're looking for any information on particular states or particular issues, those pilot studies can be very useful. And anyone on my team can help you kind of weed through what might be more of interest for whatever situation you're dealing with. The Hurricane Sandy project was very good at looking at some specific engineering work. The engineering assessments, the TECR studies are all on our website. The project development, planning guidance, those kinds of things are on our website. And there's also some operations and maintenance reports. I think there's 3 now that are on the operations and maintenance site. And then our last big report was the nature-based solutions. And that focused on coastal, but we are looking at riverine, kind of doing another study of nature-based solutions for riverine environments. So, so looking at incorporating resilience into transportation planning process, the case studies and guidebook, that is that's underway now. That should be finishing up very, very soon, but there is a white paper on our website that can be accessed now. Asset management, I hope you all are familiar with asset management and the transportation asset management plans, because those, for DOTs, those are required to be done every 4 years. And the pavement engineers are required to include climate impacts in their assessment for their pavement management systems and how they're assessing their impacts to pavement. So that can be really helpful looking at this new report coming out. This is going to help kind of show how to integrate climate impacts into asset management. HEC 25, I just went over, that's coming out very soon. We are working on finishing up a geohazards and extreme event resilience guidebook. That will be coming out soon. The 2018-2020 resilience and durability pilot studies just finished. So those are, some states have put theirs out on their own websites. I know California posted their study on their own website, but we're putting together sort of a summary of the studies and posting them as well. The CMIT tool has just been updated. The webinars for that are coming soon. And we are working on a National Highway Institute course for resilience. That should be coming out later this year. So the course itself has 4 web-based trainings, and then includes a 2-day in-person course. So there will be parts to this that focus on just climate and the science. There's one course that, and then it goes into the preliminary engineering sort of process for how to integrate resilience into transportation. And another thing I didn't mention, and I should have, so NOAA partnered with Federal Highway. The NOAA's Effects of Sea Level Rise program has a grant program where they review proposals and offer funds for sea level rise projects, and very closely related to our nature-based solutions work. So we thought it would be great to partner with them. And this year, when the solicitation went out for proposals, we did have a part of the program was focused on surface transportation resilience, and part of that specifically was related to pavement deterioration. So, so we're hoping to get a few projects that will be looking at pavement deterioration in different parts of the country under different conditions, and give us some ideas of ways that we can incorporate resilience into projects. And that's all I have. So, so if there's any questions, I can take those now. If there's any information I didn't give to you, I can certainly send something.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We appreciate you taking the time out to be with us, and a lot of good information you threw out at us, so I appreciate it so much. Dr. Zaman or Michael, I have lost the questions that were there. I know we had 4. I remember one of them was is the CMIP spreadsheet, is that a Excel-based sheet?
I believe the last version of CMIP was an Excel-based tool. The new version, I think, is something I'm not sure what it is in, but I think they updated it to something else. So I'm sorry I don't have the exact details on that, but I think the last version was Excel.
Thank you. Michael, do you see the other 3 questions?
Yeah, hey Larry, I only see the one question that you just mentioned, that it was addressed to everyone. So I guess if someone does have a question, could you repeat that question, either addressed to Larry or to the group?
So I had a couple of questions, Elizabeth. I think, first of all, I agree with Larry that you have really given a lot of content. I think Michael has already mentioned to the group, but your slides would be available on the SPTC website. So we encourage the participants to, and others for that matter, who could not make it, to actually get a copy and then a PDF of your presentation. So you mentioned about this pavement resilience guide. Is it already available, guidebook, or when would that be available?
So we're working on it now. We held the peer exchanges in the fall, right. And we're working on developing the guidebook now. I'm hoping we can get it out by this summer. But I guess that kind of depends on other priorities, you know, for just to be perfectly candid, I guess, you know, we have a new president and new administration priorities, and you just don't know what might be coming sometimes. So
how many people participated in the peer exchange program? Because you did a survey, and the survey is really very helpful because this topic is pretty broad, and see how people thought their priorities or what was most important. So how many people participated in the peer exchange?
Yeah, I would say we had about 30 attendees in both, so 60 total, maybe more than that. I can't remember the exact numbers. I know there weren't as many people in the first one as there were in the second in December,
Right.
but
So
that was about an estimate.
yeah, the reason I say that is because sometimes survey can be a tricky business, right? Depending on your population that you are surveying, uh, the results can be different. So if the 60 is a pretty good number in my opinion. What did that reflect any, the across the country, or any uh, part of the country was represented uh,
It
more than than the other?
No, it was across the country. We didn't have separate, we played around with the idea of having a peer exchange just for coastal states, and then another peer exchange just for inland states, but it didn't work out that way. We ended up just having everyone mixed together based on when they were available.
Excellent. So I have one more thing, and then others can ask their question. So this is something you hear a lot, and again, thanks to Larry for actually bringing you and also our previous speaker, to talk about pavement resilience. And before that, we had some, topic in the concrete area as well. So we hear a lot about this resilience and sustainability. So do you think that are we getting closer to actually designing pavement or constructing pavement, maintaining service life cycle and so on, that include both? Because there are some designs that may be more resilience oriented but not necessarily sustainable, or the vice versa, something sustainable may not be addressing resilience. So what are your feeling? And you are probably in a good position to sort of see. I know that I don't think that it's a choice. It's just a matter of, how quickly could we do it, right? So, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really tough question. That it depends on how you're, if you're looking at something being resilient, um, and something that, I don't know, either isn't susceptible to flooding or can bounce back from a flooding event quickly, but at the same time made of materials that reduce greenhouse gases and reduce the amount of energy needed to produce it, and all of those other things that go into sustainability. I think we're getting better and closer to some of those solutions. I think that before this, maybe we didn't think about all those things as much. And I think the more aware we are of, our material sources and the type of impacts we have in the sustainability area, we can work those together to come up with something more resilient that works for both. So I think we're getting closer. I see more and more studies coming out on both. I know some states like Minnesota seems to be very engaged in sustainability. So there's some state DOTs that are working more in this area than others, and I think some of those best practices, once they're shared, will become more accepted and utilized.
Thank you.
We got one more question for you, Elizabeth. Are you aware of any states that are currently looking at researching the short-term and long-term impacts on pavement designs that are exposed to floodwater inundation? Second part of that, will the guidebook be compiling the existing research looking at this?
So that kind of research is, exactly what we've been looking for, and that's the kind of work that will come out of the work we're doing with NOAA on the effects of sea level rise. So there will be some good studies. to be honest with you, I think most state DOTs, with their budget constraints, they build what they can afford. I don't think Pavements is always getting all the money they want or need and having to make do with what they can. And, I think it's a really tough position to come up with something innovative in an area that may not have the abundance of funding to try some new techniques in some of these areas, right? So if the cheapest solution is a 1-inch overlay to keep the road from flooding, then that's what they're going to do. They're going to keep it from flooding for another year by putting a 1-inch overlay. But figuring out, could we use a different material, or could we have used something else in the base? Could we, do these other things? I don't think that's something a lot of the DOTs have the ability to do on their own with their limited funds. So some of these studies, I hear about the problems, and I just don't think they have the resources to really get at some of those solutions. So hopefully we'll get some information out of these projects that will be starting soon.
Any other questions from anybody? Once again, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. And like I said, great information that you were giving us today, and thank you so much. Any final words, Michael or Dr. Zaman?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Larry, and thank you, Elizabeth, for doing this talk. This was an excellent topic and very timely as well. So just want to thank you both for being a part of this. And also thanks to the SPTC team for logistics support. We have a good team on the back end, sending out emails and reminders and setting all of this up. So thanks to the team, as well as ODOT and ABC UTC for sponsoring these talks as well. So for everyone in attendance, stay tuned for more future webinars. We'll be sending out more flyers and more things for next month. And if there's a topic that you want to see presented on, let us know. If you want to hear more about Elizabeth's topic or things like it, or have your own topic ideas, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll be excited to bring in speakers for that. So again, we'll post this video on our website, and stay tuned for future webinars. So thanks again, everyone. I appreciate everybody.
I just want to add one more thing. In addition to webinar, SPTC is also, doing some short course. So like a 1 day, while webinars are very good, but I think you have limited information that that could be presented. So I think this is something that Larry also, WAPA, and for that matter, other organizations and SPTC could work together along with ODOT and other organizations to have a more in-depth information like that can be done through a short course like this. So we are right now looking at any topic that you think would be of interest to our audience. So please suggest. We are not asking for money yet, Larry, right? But just say that how we could help. That's the main question. How could we help you all? And again, I want to thank also, add to what Michael said, and Larry, you said, thanks to Elizabeth for the wonderful, very content-rich presentation.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.